people straggling in as we go.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome. And I just want to let everybody know that as I'm going, this is intended to be interactive. If there's anything that you want clarified, if there are any questions, comments, anything, just let me know, pipe up, unmute yourself, and feel free. Give people just a few more minutes, so a little leeway. Hey, Rich.
Good afternoon, good evening. Okay, wait, can I hear anything? Test,
Yep.
test.
Yep, and we hear you.
My headphones disappeared off the list.
Huh.
Hey, Josh. Hi, everyone. Been a long time.
Hey, Rich.
Let's see.
All right, so we'll get going in a minute or two here. I put this together after our last organizing meeting, after I realized that there's a lot of pieces to get that even that come slowly to me, let alone people who are new to development. So I thought this was a valuable talk. And it helped me, actually. I learned a couple of things even putting it together.
It gets one of those things where if you feel like you know what you're doing, wait 10 minutes and someone will show you know nothing about it.
Yeah, if anybody can explain to me rebase, I will be much appreciated. But
I use rebase in a way that I might abuse rebase a little bit, but it's another way of merging
right
between branches. I use rebase. I use reset a lot because of anyways, I don't want to get into it if we're about ready to start the meeting.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I use rebase too.
So oh, go ahead, Stephen. I'm sorry.
I was going to say it's pretty simple. I think at least the way I use it. I'm sure there are other ways, but it just sort of checks for, like, if you're sure that the changes you're about to push are not going to conflict, it lets you do the merge that you would have had to do before it does your actual commit. So it's as if you had like pulled all the fresh changes and then made your changes real quick and then committed them before anyone else changed anything else.
Gotcha. So, and it skips the branching structure, so it looks like it's all one branch.
Right.
So in my case, if I'm working on a feature branch and master is ahead of me by some number of commits, I need to merge the current changes from master into my feature branch before I can push for a merge request. And so rebase would be the way I would do that. I say rebase from master, get pull from master, and then rebase master. And I've even rebased on the same branch. Like I want to rebase from an older commit. If I do an interactive rebase, if I recall, it'll bring up an editor and then you get to pick all the commits that come after that rebase if you want to keep them or drop them. I think that's how it goes. Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting little things where, sometimes I like, did it work the way I thought it worked? And it just happens to work out. There's a lot of crazy things like stash. You use Git stash for anything?
Git stash. I've used Git stash quite a bit. Right. All right. Well, I will get going here. Thank you, everybody. And this is RocPy, and I'm pretty sure we're one of the only Python organizing groups in the area.
We should be certain about that by now, right?
I have not seen anybody else. I've talked to a lot of people.
You know what? Let's throw the gauntlet and say we are the one,
We
the
are.
only, the best. And if someone wants to contest that, they're free to come to us and show us where they are.
Exactly. Thank you everybody for joining us, and I'm going to be going over Git, configuring Git, which is I learned a trick or two doing this, and the basics of creating a repository and pushing that repository out for others to share. So we will start.
So I know I may be jumping ahead, but is this in
Go.
use with something like GitHub or
Yep.
GitLab?
Yep. So
Okay.
can everybody see my shell? Okay. So
Yeah.
what I'm going to start with is the configuration of Git. So after you install Git, one of the first things it asks you about is if you haven't set a username and email, then it says, please do so. And it will do so until you have set it. So the general commands for setting the config files look something like that. I didn't mean to copy the carriage return, but so looks like that. The levels of config are threefold. These top ones that you see, I'm on Windows, so it's in my program files. It's wherever Git is installed. The Git config, that's referred to as the system configuration. The next level is what they call global. Your global is in your user folder, wherever that happens to be in your system. So here you see my C user J Russo Git config. So this is what you're generally setting. Obviously, if you can set these if you have something more system-wide, and just be aware that if you're using if multiple people are using that system, they will also be affected. So when you're setting your Git config global, this here says don't set the config within my local folder. If you leave this part off, it means your current Git repository, whatever folder you're in. And that you can create any folder as a Git repository. But if it hasn't been initialized as a Git repository, then you see what you see here. Obviously, my home folder, well, not obviously necessarily, but my home folder is not a Git repository. So what I'm going to do, okay, so I already set this up as a repo. I'm going to undo that real quick. So I am going to remove, let me show you what I'm doing. I want to so I'm going into Git demo here, and what makes a Git repository, what makes this folder show up as a Git repository is this .git folder. So I am going to just clear out everything in this folder. So that .git folder is basically a mirror image of the Git repository that you have out and GitHub or whatever source control you're working with. So I cleared that out, started fresh. Okay, so now no more Git repository. So now to start, you just type Git and it creates, you can see here, it creates that .git folder. So now, if I list the config, you see down at the bottom here, it also has the local .git/config in that local Git folder. Some of the context you'll get into might be a little obscure. I'm glad that one just showed up. The way to get out of that, where it is basically just scrolling through the config output that didn't quite fit all on one console screen, is the letter Q to quit. Some of the contexts that you can find yourself in are sometimes a little confusing. To that end, the next config piece that is of importance after you set, or at least for me, after you set your username and email, is your merge tool. I have set here KDIF, but there are lots of options out there. I just like KDIF, but I can almost never remember off the top of my head what those config commands are, what the config settings are. So whenever I set up a new system, I just Google it, say config settings, git config settings for KDIF, and that comes up the top of the list. So Google is your friend. So yes, and also credential helper. The Git credential helper. Let's see here. Is it only? Yes, here we go. So the credential helper here is at the system level. In Windows, it comes by default. In Linux, on the Linux side of things, you actually have to set it. Generally, there is a pretty simple one that's just, let's see if I can paste this. Yes. So the credential helper store, it just stores your credentials in your user folder. So it's protected, and it just stores the credentials in a text file. So, but it is very helpful. There are other options for storing credentials. This is just the easiest. But if you search Git credential helpers, you'll get some more information on the different options there. In Mac, that saves it, I believe, by default into the keyring. So yes. So and the thing that I learned recently is this show origin, because without the show origin, it just lists out all of the configs. And that's great if you want to know what all the configs are, but if you don't know where they're coming from, it's kind of hard to go and I like to go into the actual config files to modify them, because I think it's easier than those commands, although I do still use the commands. When I find stuff out on the web, it's easy just to throw the commands on. But if I'm going in and tweaking it, I'm generally going into these different files, and it's just helpful to know where the different settings are if you want to go and tweak them. All right, so now create a couple of files. I'm just going to switch this up a little bit. I'll just show that whole screen, make that easy. Are you guys seeing the Visual Studio Code and the command prompt in Windows Explorer?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm just gonna create a, oh, I got to think about that. Okay. So now you can see that Git sees one file is created, and this is PoshGit. It's an extension to PowerShell, which I really like. But if you're in a different context, Linux, Unix, Mac, what have you, you can always see the same information with Git stats. So you can see here, it tells you what branch you're on, that there are no files in the staging area, and we'll get into that. And you have one newly added untracked file. So now I will do a git add. I think that the intended default purpose of git add is file by file. I never do file by file. I always do hyphen capital A that does all files. Anything that is untracked, it adds. Later on, we'll get into the git ignore, which allows that to actually be reasonable. So that you can have you can define patterns of files and paths that you want to exclude, and so you know that when you do a add all files, you're actually adding files that you want to have committed. So now that stages a file, and what that means is it's added the file into the Git kind of ecosystem that you have in your folder here. It made that .git folder aware of this file, but it hasn't actually hasn't really saved it. It just made it aware of it. So now you do status, you see changes to be committed. So we have this new file. Now I'm going to show you what the difference looks like. So now you can see you have changes to be committed. These are the staged files. This is the one staged file and the untracked files. So you can get a feel for all the things that are in pipeline, so to speak, in the Git repository in your workflow. And what's nice about this is that if you have a set of files and you only want to add a few of them into the repository, you can do that. Even though, like I said, I usually add all of it, there are times where I piecemeal add things. So I will add one or two files, stage those, and then you can say commit just the staged files, which is the default behavior. Sometimes when you're working in an IDE, it will allow you, in fact, most of the time, it will allow you to skip the staged part. And so it'll say, just commit all untracked files to source control. And what it's doing behind the scenes is actually adding it to the stage, and committing it based all as one action. So, all right, I will do it. I will do a git commit though. So -m message. So now if we do a git status, it's just that one untracked file. So it took the new file and saved it into the local Git repository. And now, if there was, we don't have it yet, but if there was a remote repository set, would be GitHub or whatever other primary source control, those files that have been fully committed to your local repository, those commits are the only things that will go when you do a git push. Now, I don't have a remote set yet. We will get there. But when you do a git push, it takes all of your current commits in your current branch and pushes them out into the remote repository. So the next thing I want to show you is git log. So this is a list of all of the commits in your local repository, for the current branch of your local repository too. We'll get into branches in a moment. So you can see the commit ID is big ugly string. When you reference a commit from the command line, you can use just the first part. I don't know. I think you can use any variation on like any length of this as long as it's unique. So if the first 4 characters of it are unique, that should be enough that you can uniquely identify. You can say, create a branch from this commit, and it will create a branch from that commit as long as the commit ID is unique enough to uniquely identify that commit. So, any questions? No? Okay. So next we are going to create a branch. All right. So git checkout, and when you are generally using git checkout, it's going to be switching branches. -B tells it create a new branch from the branch that you're currently on, our main branch. So we'll do so now you've sort of created a main branch. If what I found was that if I did a checkout, and I want to confirm that here, playing around with it earlier, I do a checkout main, checkout my that. All right, good. It did stick around. For some reason, when I tried to switch away from a branch earlier that I hadn't actually committed anything to, it couldn't find it. I probably just mistyped it. Anyways, so now we have our main branch and a feature branch. Other times, you're going to use branches when you want to add a bunch of stuff to your current project, but it's going to take some time to develop. It could just be a short amount of time, but it's more than just a 1 or 2 line, oh, I just want to add this in. That is that is not uncommon to do in a primary branch. You may have multiple primary branches for different environments, but if it's any kind of complexity, it's highly recommended that you take your main branch, create a new feature branch of where you're going to develop that feature, and then do a commit. Oh, I didn't add. So the untracked files, if you have not added any of them yet, commit will not do anything. So there, I added it, committed it. Nothing to commit because it's all added into this feature branch. And you'll also notice that even though I was in the main branch when I created that test2.txt, it carried over with me into my my branch, my feature branch. It allowed me to do that because there was no conflicts. You can switch, you can make changes in different branches and realize, oh, I'm in the wrong branch, I shouldn't be there. It happens all the time. As long as there's no conflicts between the branch that you currently have checked out and the branch that you want to be in, you can switch over and still commit your changes over in the branch that you actually want to be in. So I'm going to do a git log. So now you see that initial commit on main, and when I created the feature branch, what you're doing is you're creating a snapshot of your current branch. So when I created my feature branch, it created a snapshot of main, and so you see that initial commit from main and my first feature commit in the feature branch. So now if I do a git checkout back to main and do a git log, you only see your initial commit. And you notice over here, test2 went away because that has been committed into the feature branch. So here, I'm going to add another file. Git add. And so now we have the two files in main. You see hotfix and initial commit. And then if I do checkout back over onto my feature branch, we don't get that test3. We're back to our test2 and the test and test2. And if I do a git log, you see you have just the initial commit and the first feature commit because it was a snapshot of that main branch when you created this branch. So now I will show you actually I wanted to be back over there. Check out. Now I'm going to merge main with my current branch. So now what that did was it pulled all of the existing commits that were in main. It merged them into my current branch. So now I have all 3 files in my feature branch. So now I'm going to do a git check out main, and I'm going to say here all right. Oh boy. Mine just flashed on me. All right. I don't know if anybody can see me, but my computer just froze.
I can see you moving.
Okay, well, we're not totally dead. Well, what I was attempting to do, nothing's responding. Can I stop the share? Oh boy. And are we back? All right. It stopped sharing.
It stopped sharing.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right, let's try that again. Okay. I think we're back. Yes?
Yes.
Cool. All right. Made a change to that file to git add. So add is for adding changes, not just adding files. So I changed that file. I have to add that file into the staging context. I have to say, yes, this change I actually care about. Now I say git commit. So now I'm going to switch over to the feature branch. Random text, but it will illustrate the point. So now I am changing both files. So now, when I do git merge from main, it's going to be a conflict. So now, what we want to do is git merge tool. Popped up on the other window, but this is, that's probably bigger than it needs to be. So this is KDIF, and you can see This was the initial common file, common to both branches. This is the current value in the local branch, the current branch, my feature branch. And this is the current value in the remote branch, the branch that's being pulled into my feature branch, which is currently main. So you're saying, I don't know what to do with these. The Git and KDiff both are very intelligent when it comes to merging. But if it is on the same line, generally you have to say which of these, like if both sides change on the same line, generally you have to say which one wins, or what I'm going to do right here, I'm going to say take both. Or you can even say switch the order. So I like KDiff. I probably just because I know the shortcut keys. If I do a control 2, it takes what's in column B here. If I do control 3, it takes what's in column C here. Or I can do it control 3, control 2, and it shows up in the order in which I add it. So I want it by bread. I want to say hello, buddy. By bread. And then you say saved. Oh, there's line conflict. So interestingly enough, one of them has just carriage returns, the other one has carriage returns line feeds. I'm not quite sure how I manage that one. But I will just choose one. And we're good. It cleans up most of the originals. Orig is one of those things that I tend to ignore. I tend to add to a get ignore. So why don't we do that? Because right at the moment, it's going to see that file that text3.orig. And we don't want to commit that. That's just an artifact change. So there's lots of different tools creating, like, and IDEs are famous for creating folders. Visual Studio Code has .vs code. Visual Studio has a .vs folder. You generally want to exclude those, though not all of the things within them. You'll learn as you go what files are useful to share amongst your colleagues and which ones aren't. But in general, most of the stuff in those types of folders can be pretty safely excluded. So we are going to create a .git ignore. So in here, we can say things like *.orig. Save that. You can see it automatically went gray over here. And now we still have two files. I'm avoiding going into the Git information in VS Code because each UI is different. Every Git UI, every IDE, Git tool, they're all different. The common thread is what can you do on the command line. If you know the command line, you can navigate any Git UI. So you can see now we have the modified test3 from the merge and the new git ignore and not the text3 orig because we have our git ignore. So git add. All right. So now we have a lot more going on in here. So up top, we have our merge from main. Before that was the to-do, both in our strictly in our main feature branch, because that merge from main it doesn't exist down in main. And you can see down here, these are I was not expecting to see this here, merge main branch into my feature branch. I think this is showing that this was an action that was taken from main. To be honest, I don't have as much experience with the git log on the command prompt. But it is still useful to know that like if you want to see your history, that and there's a lot that you can do. There's a lot of options. If you're curious, dig into the git log command line options, and there's a lot that you can do with this command. I am not as familiar with it. And honestly, the git log, the git history, that is one thing that is super helpful to use GUI tools for. You visualizing it, it's really hard to visualize your history here. So I know that, what is it? I'll think of it. Oh, Source Tree. Source Tree does a really great job, or at least I like it, for its visualizations. But the tools like the GitHub client is good. Visual Studio Code has a decent Git integration, but it still feels a little lacking in some regards to me. I'm generally doing most of my interactions with Git on the command line, even if I don't really use the command line for the history portion. The commits and the pushes and pulls and clones, all of that, I frequently do from the command line. One of the things that pushed me to the command line was actually authentication. If you find yourself in a place like AWS code commit, and you have set up two-factor authentication, that doesn't work through almost any UI. You have to use the command line for your pulls and pushes and fetch. Just the way that the credential helper for the two-factor authentication works, it frequently throws a monkey wrench into UIs. So learn your command line, it will do you good. Okay, so next, we're going to, let's see, I think next is creating, let's create a repo to push to. All right. All right, so this is a repo that I created before when I was playing around, but I'm just going to create a fresh one just so you can see that. So all right, we'll make it public. And they give you the option here of adding a template for README. README is a really good idea for your repositories. If you have a README.md for README. So generally done Markdown, which is a strict text type file, but it uses formatting, uses a pattern for creating it that is turned into HTML when you're viewing it in the browser, when you're browsing the repository. Template, Git-ignore, and the license. Licensing is, you could have an entire, probably multi-day discussion on what the different licensing options are. If you choose to have a start an open source project, research licensing, I am not the guy to come to for when it comes to asking about licensing. It is really confusing, and there are people who spend years understanding, and it is their job to understand licensing. So it's definitely an important aspect of many open source projects. It drives what it is that can and can't be done with the project legally. And so it is definitely an important aspect, but maybe not for your initial repository and initial delving into Git. So I'm just going to leave these as is. So now we have a bare repository. So this here is, you'll notice, very similar to what you have up here. And you can actually use this. I'm not quite sure if the .git actually is needed or it advise you anything, but you'll often see a .git at the end, but I'm pretty sure it's optional. That's it. Let's just try. So, and you'll notice down here, they say how to wire up. So pushing from an existing repository, which is what we're doing. We are going to add a remote origin. So here, we're going to take that, go back over here. I'm going to go down CD, not CD, Git, check out main. Ah, yes. All right. Well, I'm going to be a little unorthodox. A lot of times when you're pushing, when you're adding a the remote, I'm generally thinking in the main, but seeing as we don't have our Git-ignore in here, I'm going to switch back to the feature branch and make sure we get the Git-ignore out in the repo. So paste that. All right, so. So I'm going to change that to our branch name. Oh, I wonder if that mattered. We shall see. I'm not quite sure what the git branch -m does, but we can look that up. And git push. Now, I'm going to do, I know it says to do the -u origin, but I just want to show you this real quick because if you push a branch that has not yet been pushed into your remote, it will give you the syntax to do it. Saying, oh, by the way, this is what you actually meant. Now, this is the long form of what you see up here. So these two commands do the same thing, but I am frequently coming in to a fresh branch, typing git push, and then copying the command that it spits out. And now that branch is up in GitHub. There you go. So now, let's see what we got here. I think that the next thing is really starting from a remote repository. So we started from a local folder. If you want to start from a remote repository, we'll do so git clone, and I just want to see, yeah, they have the, I'm pretty sure that if you just take that, it'll work just, yep. The .git is not necessary for those GitHub paths. There might be other systems that it matters in, but on GitHub it does not. So what we just did was in this git test folder, it pulled down the demo repo into its own folder from git clone. And you see the .git folder is a hidden folder. I don't actually remember the dir version of it, version of show all files. But if we look at git test demo, you see the .git folder is there. So it's all the, that is all of the basic commands that I use on a daily basis. There's very few times where I do anything other than those sets of commands. You'll find yourself using git clone much more often than you will adding a remote origin, but I have done it. I've used it sometimes if you are moving a repository. So we have had an instance where we went from having all of our source code hosted internally to moving it into a cloud service. So at that point, we just migrated all of our Git repositories from one service to another, but then our local repositories needed to point to that new location. So we then just updated all of the origins to point to the new host. So that was one scenario where we actually did use Git, the Git origin setting. But it's not something that I find I do all that frequently. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, maybe I missed something. I had a quick question.
Yep, go for
It looked like when you cloned, it put you right into your feature branch.
Yes, because that was what I pushed the feature branch as the feature branch. So if you look back, when I pushed here, I pushed upstream. This set the remote feature branch within origin as my feature branch. So I did everything. I pushed up into origin as my feature branch. So the only branch that's up there right at the moment is my feature branch.
Okay, so your main is only local? Sorry.
Right at the moment, my main is only local. So if I go to this is still a local branch, but I can just do a get push. Set upstream. And now my main is also up in Git. So when you're pushing up into origin, it's really on a branch by branch basis. When you're pushing even initially into origin, you're just pushing the branch that you're currently in.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome. Anything else?
Can you walk through what it takes to actually abandon a set of changes you've made? There's been times where I'll have tried to tackle a bug fix only to find out that one of my teammates beat me to it, and then I find that I'm struggling to like back out the work that I had started and end up doing like crazy things like stashes and all that just to get back to the original version.
Yeah. So you're talking about backing out commits that are already in your local repository?
Or just the pending changes, yeah.
Well, so pending changes are easier. If you haven't actually committed the changes, a git reset hard will wipe out everything that's untracked. So right at the moment, I have that git orig is an untracked file. If I do a git reset hard, you know what? It doesn't remove new files. If a file already exists. So if I modify this, so now yes. So now it says that this is modified. Now if I do a reset hard, it should say, yep. So it reverted that modified file. And I lost the change. But
Gotcha.
the new file, untracked files, the reset hard, because there's nothing to reset to, it doesn't do anything.
Okay. And what if it's what if there were commits, local commits?
That gets tricky. I have had to do that, and removing a commit is not an easy feat. Generally, what the easiest thing that I have found is to switch to a branch that has a copy of the file in a state that you want it, and copy it, switch back, make a copy of it off into a temp folder somewhere, wherever, switch your branch back to your current lead branch, and paste over top of that file with the version that you want. There's not a real good way that I know to roll back a commit.
Oh, you could use rebase for that. That's what I've
You
used
can
it
use
for.
rebase for that? Okay. Well, like I said, I don't have a whole lot of experience with rebase. It sounds like I need to.
Yeah, I found out about that recently. If you do so you can rebase, or it might complain. So you might want to try, and I think it's called an interactive rebase with -i on the same branch. So you would specify a earlier commit that you want to go back to. And with interactive, that's when you get to choose which intermediate commits you want to keep. Maybe I'm trying to remember, play around with it, but generally speaking, I think that's how you can do it. One way.
Well, there you go. That is also an option potentially.
Cool. Thank you.
Welcome. But yeah, that is a tricky problem. That is kind of one of those ones that gets just about everybody eventually.
I usually hit Google for a while and just end up like blowing it away and just get cloning it again.
Yeah,
That's what I usually do.
Yeah, that's totally reasonable, actually.
Control Alt Delete for code.
Yeah, you gotta love it.
So you can use the get revert for undoing commits. What it does is it takes the last two commits, compares them, and creates another commit that reverses it.
Yep.
Okay, so it's a little different than the reset, but that's what you use for a commit, the get revert.
Get revert, yeah. I think that I have looked at that, and usually what the challenge that if I'm remembering correctly, is that I need it to go back further than it can, than it supports. So that is, yes, thank you. That is an option that I forgot about. Though I think it has some limitations from my memory.
Yes, it's only the last two commits. So if you need to go back further than that, it won't work.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I did forget about that. Anything else?
Josh or anyone, this is a question that I would probably ask at the restaurant after, because it's kind of like a more specialized question. But I'm looking to create or otherwise manage a bunch of different Git repositories with Python somehow, and I know I can like shell out and just like in the shell run Git init and things like that, but I'd love to be able to do things like create a repository as the user that the WSGI daemon is running under, and then crazy stuff like that. Kind of building a very minimal MVP of a source code tracking tool. It's not going to have any kind of issue tracking. It's literally just to spin up new repositories. Are you aware of any like Python API for Git or any sort of thing like that?
I'm not sure. I know. So the one thing that comes to mind is GitLab is a local basically GitHub version, so that you can manage multiple repositories, but for a lightweight Python ability to interact with different Git repositories, I don't know of anything. I'd have to take a look. I would be surprised if there isn't anything, but I have not actually looked for it. Okay.
Yeah, I saw GitLab. It seems like it's a replacement for GitHub or something like that.
Yeah, it's basically a personal GitHub.
Yeah, I'm just looking for a way to manipulate repositories in Python.
My company uses GitLab, a private installation of it, and it's a pretty substantial one. Yeah, like GitHub, I'm sure. I know GitLab has personal tokens to interact with the API. So if there's an API, then with that, anything is possible with Python and interacting with that. And I just discovered a wonderful utility for GitLab. Maybe it's a stopgap for those who like using the terminal for these things, but it's called Glab, Glab. And it's a GitLab on the command line, and it gives you all sorts of interactive commands to communicate through GitLab's API to modify and view things like pipelines, CI, merges, create merge requests. Everything you do through the web, you can do through the command line with this thing, which is really neat. So yeah, I think if that can be done with the command line tool, then certainly I think there's a way to do it with Python. It may be written in Python for all I know. I haven't bothered checking.
So it does look like there is a Git Python library. So
is it's just up on the G Shop Git Python, or
yeah,
I have to admit I didn't look because I didn't want to be biased towards anything. So
are we talking about modifying Git directly, or are we talking about doing it through GitHub or GitLab? I guess I'm missing part of the question.
I want to be able to make a commit programmatically.
Okay.
Like I'm creating some installable modules programmatically, and I want them to have their own Git repository when I create them, and then
so they could be local repositories, right? They don't have to be remote necessarily.
Yeah, they would be local over SSH.
Okay.
Interesting. So yeah,
it's kind of a specialized use case, but I figured
maybe something. I might suggest something like Fabric for Python, which you can do makefile, sort of automation kind of stuff, and you can use with that SSH provisioning through. I think it's called Paramiko. So you might be able to use Fabric.
Yeah, that's that library that lets you do SSH, right?
Yeah, run commands remotely and call local commands. And I liken it to make but in Python, but it's way more expressive because obviously you have the full power of Python syntax and library behind it. But I think Fabric might do what you're looking to do, because then you can call Git by directly underneath as a subshell, or popen or whatever you're using there.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, sounds like a fun project.
Yeah, I'm trying to build a sort of a framework to rapidly iterate on some things, and I'm finding that I'm always creating new packages, and always running Git init in them and pushing them to and it's like it'd be great if I could just fill in some details and get the thing and have all the stuff set up for it.
Cool. All right. Well, if nobody else has any questions, then I will call that a wrap. Thank you, everyone. I hope you got some valuable information out of tonight.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Josh. It was very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
You're welcome.